really excited for this panel. We're going to be talking about how American Bitcoin policy and global Bitcoin policy is shaping what companies and countries around the world are doing. I think in the last 12 months, we've seen a massive shift in global Bitcoin policy. So really excited to dig into this. Figure we could start quickly with some introductions. Let's go down the line here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeremy. I'm from Singapore. I recently ran in the elections to be a member of parliament in Singapore. And one of the core ideas that I pushed forward was for Bitcoin to be part of the national reserves. And I'm the best performing independent candidate in 50 years. Yeah.
Hi, pleased to be here. My name is Bilal Bin Saqib. I am the Minister for Crypto, a special advisor to the Prime Minister in Pakistan, where let me also quickly introduce you to Pakistan. We are the 5th most populous country on earth, 250 million people, 70% under the age of 30. And we have around 40 to 50 million crypto users in the country. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andy. I'm an investor, accredited investor in Singapore. I write a lot of opinion articles, books, and so forth. Nice to meet you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, Bitcoin Asia. My name is Nenter Chow. I'm the global CEO of Bitmart Exchange. We've been around for the past 7 years with 12+ million users. Glad to be here today. Thank you.
My name is Grant McCarty. I'm the co-president, co-founder of the Bitcoin Policy Institute. We're the largest Bitcoin policy organization in the United States. We're actually the largest cryptocurrency think tank in the world. And for the last 4+ years, we've been working with members of the US government and Congress, the executive branch, to change their opinion, their perspective on Bitcoin, to promote it as a strategic asset for countries all over the world. And I think over the last 9 to 12 months, as I mentioned earlier, we've seen a massive shift in how the United States is thinking about this technology. And so really quickly, I want to set the stage for what we've seen just since the start of 2025. So in the United States, we now have a firmly pro-Bitcoin administration. In writing, in an executive order, this administration has said that they want to be a global Bitcoin superpower, which suggests that a number of things, that there is a race to accumulate Bitcoin, that there is global competition with regard to Bitcoin policy, that different countries want to lead in different ways. The United States established a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Currently, there's about $10 billion in this reserve in the United States. We recently passed stablecoin legislation in Congress. There's going to be cryptocurrency market structure legislation that is passed soon. And altogether, all aspects of government and the executive branch have shown that they're supportive of this industry. They're offering guidance to companies and organizations saying, we want to be pro-Bitcoin, we want to be pro-crypto. We're going to set policies that support that and let people operate. So with that framing, I really want to hear from each of you, like your personal experience. You all represent different constituencies, some of you public sector, some of you private sector. What has been your response, whether for your country or your company, based on the massive shift that we've seen in the United States?
Yeah, perhaps I'll go first. I think with the advent of the Genius Act and all of the progress that stablecoins are making, it makes it even more necessary for every country to have a Bitcoin, because it will come a point in time where it is weird not to receive and use stablecoins. But that leaves the question, what about the currency of your own country, right? It will not be a situation where a US stablecoin lives side by side with an inferior stablecoin. And that's all the reason more every country should adopt Bitcoin. And it's especially important even for smaller countries, not the 5th most populous country, but even the small country like Singapore, where a huge part of the wealth actually flows through trade flows and through FX. So the question is, what is the value of your home currency? And the only way to strengthen that sovereignty is to have more Bitcoin in your reserves.
Yeah, so thank you. And you see, when you mentioned that from the previous regime to this regime, where President Trump essentially came in and said we want to make crypto, USA the crypto capital of the world, and that discussion happening in Washington doesn't just stay in Washington. It has an impact globally. When you talk about the Genius Act, when you talk about setting up the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, when you talk about market structure, Bill, all of that helps us create great precedents in terms of which we can then discuss with our governments, our bureaucracy, and say that these discussions are happening in Washington, and hence why it helps us push that narrative in the global South with other of our counterparts. So, Pakistan has also announced setting up a Bitcoin strategic reserve using the same principles, where there were Bitcoins that were confiscated by law enforcement agencies. And then not just that, we suffer from a very unique problem where we have excess electricity. And because that the narrative at the top has changed and there was a lot of confusion, which is now turned into clarity, that provides countries like us a unique opportunity to turn our liabilities into digital gold, and to make sure that a country which has millions of, where the median age is 23, we can create frameworks and policies mirroring the United States that puts our youth of the country at the forefront of innovation.
Andy, you've been speaking with government legislators, regulators for years. Do you agree that there's been a shift within the last year in how those conversations are going?
Based on what I see, the conversations have really turned from lukewarm to very positive. Within all the different countries, the administration and so forth. But I want to point one thing out, is that I love what America is doing right now. But somewhat, all this legislation comes out in really godlike speed at the same time, right? So if you zoom out and you take a look at Asia, right? So of course we have our dear friend here, Pakistan, Bhutan, and even Philippines, who are more in the works of talking and buying Bitcoin as a reserve. The rest of the other country, whether they are the more developed ones or the least developed ones, what they are trying to do right now is doing some sort of a catch-up game. Right, so they do not talk about Bitcoin reserve as yet, but they are trying to push the agenda of tokenizing, some of their assets. Maybe it could be their company. Some of them are talking about tokenizing their stock. And then of course, following that, there will be some stable coin, new regulations. I think step by step, things are opening up. Right, you could see that in Singapore. Of course, in some ways, we could say that it took a step back because of the new Payment Act. But if you look at Japan, South Korea, and so forth, they are moving forward in a very steady pace. Put the law in place, tokenize in place, stablecoin in place, then they could talk about Bitcoin reserve. So the approach is the same, but it's not as fast as what US did.
Nenter, your company operates internationally. What have you seen in the last year? What has the impact been on some of your business discussions, on users? Do you see policy and discussions that are happening in the US or in other countries? Does that have an impact on your day-to-day operations or your users?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess from the private sector perspective, or the exchange perspective, so to speak, obviously we've been embracing the volatility and also the volume surge across spot and derivative transactions. And one thing that Bitmart has been doing very well. We've scaled out our operations. Everything from hiring more folks around the globe to upgrading our trading system to our third generation trading system, which effectively allows faster, more secure transactions to be executed, which is important, especially when now you're onboarding a whole new set of institutional players, not just on the retail side. So I think all of that is really to ensure the best execution environment for both institutional and retail needs. Now, what's interesting, I guess, from the exchange perspective is, you'll see a lot of data on how, on-chain is the future, which, very likely it is. But, the one thing about spot Bitcoin settlement, for example, is actually that volume has been shifting back to the exchanges and also in the stock market via spot ETFs. And now I think 75% of that volume is on off-chain platforms such as ourselves. And by the way, that figure is not for Bitmart, it's just across the industry. Another interesting fact is that when there was a huge surge in volume in February, March, right, and since then has kind of tapered off, spot transactions have come down about 20-25% since that surge. Derivative transactions actually have remained relatively the same. It was only dropped off maybe 2 to 3%, and that's largely due to the fact that institutions they need the derivatives as a way to hedge, a way to sort of execute their ARB strategies, and also on the retail side. It's really interesting. 80% of the retail transactions that are derivatives, they're closed within 24 hours. So there's certainly this high-frequency trading sort of behavior that's been happening. Obviously, for us, we're relatively, we provide that platform for all users to sort of meet their needs. But I guess on the topic of, what I've been seeing globally, over the last couple of months, I've been traveling around the world and attended a lot of closed-door roundtables with government, quasi-government entities to really discuss how to, so they can understand market risks better, B, to see what other jurisdictions are doing that they should be, and C, to sort of, review sort of the draft policies that are in place. Because I think I was actually surprised. I would have assumed there would have been more sort of dialogue and communication and discussion and I think that's what Bilal and Grant, we were talking about this backstage a little bit earlier, that I think this type of, open dialogue should be happening more because they're certainly reaching out to private sector folks such as myself and others in the industry, and I think this type of dialogue is very healthy for the continued adoption of Bitcoin and crypto as a whole.
So there are a couple interesting ideas that we've touched on here. Andy, you make the point that, hey, some countries might not be ready just yet for a strategic Bitcoin reserve, right? They need to set the foundation of their policy work first. Nenter, you mentioned there's spot ETF buys, there are derivative, derivative trading. There's also day-to-day transaction with Bitcoin, day-to-day users using Bitcoin as money, as currency. Bilal, I'm curious to hear from you. So you've advocated for Pakistan to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. How do you think about Bitcoin with regard to digital gold and holding it? And then this broader idea of making Pakistan a global Bitcoin hub, right? Actually encouraging companies to build, people to use Bitcoin. Just walk me through kind of the process of how you're thinking about this from the governmental level.
Yeah, so we we understand the importance of Bitcoin, and which is why we've announced the reserve. And to accumulate that, we also want to contribute our resources, our electricity towards mining, on which we've also announced for 2,000 megawatts of electricity. And we want, and we've also set up a Pakistan Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority, which is an independent regulator outside the SEC and the central bank, that will incubate and accelerate all of these crypto activities, where we create a regulatory regime that fosters innovation. And we want builders to come in. And why we are unique, we are not a Dubai or a Singapore, but what we have is access to a lot of resources. We are the third largest freelancer market in the world. If the youth of Pakistan was to be an independent country, would have been the 10th biggest country on earth. We have 50,000 IT graduates, and we already have so many builders who are still kind of acting as back office. But all of this creates an enabling environment for them, where they become, why can't we have multi-billion-dollar protocols being created out of Pakistan? And not just that, we have a lot of social economic problems. We have 100 million unbanked people in the country. So we have the brains, and then we have all the problems where all those ideas can be turned into execution, and we can, just like you mentioned, we are looking at tokenizing our illiquid assets. So Bitcoin is great, but we want to use blockchain into seeing how we can, use that in government efficiency, how we can use that in stopping counterfeit. So we are exploring all of that.
Yeah, so, adding to that, we as, in Singapore, we don't even have the luxury of spare electricity, right? And we buy almost like all energy. We don't have renewable energy. And we're the fourth largest FX hub in the world. And those factors together add up to a survivability issue for us. We had one company IPO in the last year for our local stock market. So each country's local stock markets are going to compete with liquidity from Bitcoin, the Sharpe ratio of Bitcoin, and that's a problem for countries that don't have natural resources. And that's why all the more Bitcoin is a necessity for us for survival, right? And also, when more liquidity gets extracted away from traditional SWIFT networks to be on-chain, it could be yield protocols, it could be MMs and whatnot. That poses a question: why even have localized physical financial hubs at all, right? Because we are, Singapore has been competing with Hong Kong for the longest time to be the FX hub of Asia, and now that evolution will go into the Bitcoin world. It will go on-chain, it will go onto stable coins, and for many countries, the question about whether or not you should have a localized stock exchange is on everybody's mind, because you first have to clear the Bitcoin hurdle rate, and then you need to have the liquidity, and you need to have the volatility to have an active stock exchange. And that's going to be a problem for the Global South. Yeah.
I just want to add on, as a fellow Singaporean, I felt that, it's not so much about the electricity, right? We are a small country, but we have money, right? We could always buy up a lot of the ETFs and so forth, right? So that could be one way, but I really want to point out the other fact that, we talk about tokenized business, right? Tokenized stock exchange and so forth. So I once almost invested into a RMO license, it's a regulated market operator license. But I realized that the biggest problem in a lot of this industry is that since your national exchange does not have too much liquidity, starting a Bitcoin exchange or starting some form of other digital exchange, it will not have liquidity as well. So what we should really do, apart from the Singapore example, is to build the foundation right. So if you have the right strategic mindset, then you could walk on the path of what Pakistan, has done so far into building it out, right? So we talk about, Bitcoin as a payment. Of course, it's a bit expensive, but if you look at it on a longer term basis, you could use the same technology behind, to look at the supply chain effects, fight counterfeits, track your money as well. So I think it's going to be a whole package instead of just zooming into specific policies. So I think the package is important.
Yeah, Nenter, how do you think about building the foundation of the Bitcoin economy? What does that look like from your perspective? You're focused on the users, you're focused on enabling people to use this technology in different ways and access it in the way that they want to or they need to. So there's the policy side of this, and there's the building side. And I think what we're hitting on is they need to coexist.
Absolutely. And look, I think with the U.S. leading the way on crypto policy as a whole, I think it creates a halo effect for the industry globally, so to speak. From a top-down perspective, I think it certainly works, and you're seeing that with institutions, with public companies accumulating Bitcoin for their treasury programs. I think what's needed in the future is actually the bottoms-up approach, which is really how do you sort of make sure the individual understands the value of Bitcoin, the financial literacy rate, I think, around the globe can certainly use that educational effort to really, understand and be able to learn and invest for themselves, which is why I think, a lot of other industry leaders have focused on educational efforts, and that's something Bitmart's founder Sheldon and I have discussed on numerous occasions, and that we're looking to actively support around the world. Is how do you bring up that financial literacy level up, and it starts with supporting a lot of the, for example, universities, right, sponsoring events, helping bring on certain educators to help help everyone sort of get up to speed. Shanghai is actually, I believe, the #1 city where, in terms of financial literacy, I think children by the age of 8 are already well versed in sort of personal finance matters, right? And I can't say that for many places around the world. And that's certainly one of the most important initiatives for Bitmart, for myself as well, for our founder, because it really, for us, it's really about how do you become an actively contributing player in this broader crypto Web3 ecosystem, right? And it really is in line with the original ethos of this industry, which is really to create a equitable society. So to me, I think that it comes down to the education.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. We started the Bitcoin Policy Institute because we realized if you don't understand what Bitcoin is and how it works, it is nearly impossible to make good policy with regard to Bitcoin. And every time we speak with offices, a Congress member, they go, well, who in my district or who in my constituency is using this? How are they using this? Contrary to certain people's beliefs, but lawmakers do want to listen to their constituents, and they hear the phone calls or the emails that they get about different issues, and they want to make sure that they're responding to the actual needs and the day-to-day use cases of their constituents. So for the first couple of years of the Bitcoin Policy Institute, we're just explaining, here's what Bitcoin is, here's what Bitcoin isn't, here's how it works, and then from there, in 2024, we're able to popularize something like the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve as a policy issue, but we couldn't do that in 2021 because how is the government going to buy something that they don't even understand? So, Bilal, I want to hear from you, and Jeremy, I want to hear from you. Like, what does that educational process look like to get to the point where you're buying Bitcoin, where you're creating policy around this? Because there are years of work before that go in that people don't really see.
So I recently made a trip to El Salvador, and I met with President Bukele, and I think El Salvador has done a great job with their Bitcoin office, and especially Stacy, who leads that they've introduced the concept of money, and they've started to educate the youth, like even young children, on what is money. And I think that is something that we, in our culture, at least in Asia, take that for granted. And I think that is very important, so that from a very young age, you are taught at the importance of money. And not just that, I think so you need to educate toddlers and then people who are at the highest top as well. I think the middle age gap is pretty well kind of updated with what is happening. So you need to educate government officers and bureaucrats, etc., who might not have ever bought Bitcoin, but they have an opinion. And that opinion is based on value, not on factual information. And hence why, so we are pushing again in partnership. And this is the first time that Pakistan and El Salvador came together on the concept of diplomacy. So we are, changing traditional diplomacy into diplomacy and learning from them, and taking these frameworks to upskill our bureaucracy, our government on these courses, so they can actually understand what it is. Because if we do not, then there is this blockage of opinions that people have.
Jeremy, you ran on a Bitcoin platform, and one thing that you said to me before the panel was things like inflation actually resonated a lot with people in Singapore. So can you talk about these ideas that underpin Bitcoin? And yeah, there's the educational efforts, but there are these ideas that people, they already intuitively get or they understand. So what was your experience with that?
The real problem is about fiat education, right? For countries that are in the G10 with single currency stable coins, as we call it in Singapore, we've never really had to really think much about fiat. But now that we see things inflate out of the next generation's reach, we have this bigger worry, because for countries like Hong Kong and Singapore, Bitcoin is perfect. Why is that so? It's very much ingrained in our Eastern Asian culture to own hard assets, right? And the problem is that with land-constrained societies like Hong Kong and Singapore, that chase for a property as a hard asset ends up becoming a generational Ponzi, right? The next generation has to buy your bags, right? And that's a problem for societies like ours, where we fundamentally chase a hard asset, but we end up just crowding around property as always, right? And the real education around this is that even in campaigning, one of the things that I mentioned is that your next generation's income has to be higher than the previous generation for there to be property appreciation. And that's a problem with AI. And with that situation, the country needs to change its way of thinking into looking at Bitcoin and property and hard assets. And that's why it's very important. Let me give you some examples of also headwinds sometimes, right? Our current Prime Minister was the Minister of Finance when the FTX collapse happened. He was up for re-election this year. So a lot of the policies that were around Bitcoin actually stalled heavily. We were very early. We had a stablecoin framework in 2018, but most of the talk around stablecoins and Bitcoin had to take a back seat in order for the election to happen. And right after the election happened, we saw a change in the way we looked at the Genius Act, the stablecoins, and also we started to have a police task force over crypto scams. I mean, albeit it's 4 people right now, but we're still on our way. And sometimes it's political headwinds that may come and go, but eventually, as long as the direction is correct, the nation will be okay. Yeah.
Andy, switching gears slightly, one thing that Bilal mentioned is this idea of international cooperation, diplomacy. So as you're dealing with different governmental bodies, what do you see in terms of, you've made the point that you think there needs to be more foundational policy work. We've talked about something like the Genius Act, which is the United States stablecoin legislation. There's market structure legislation that's being worked on. To what extent is cooperation possible with regard to non-governmental organizations or different governments or countries that might feel like they're in competition with each other?
Based on what I see, from maybe from an association standpoint, right? Many of them that are more digital currency or Bitcoin focused, they have their own agenda, right? And eventually, if you really look deep into their model, they are trying to sell some of these causes, right? So to maintain their operations. So I actually spoke to the G20 guys. I said, hey, is there a way that we could form a more standardized platform where we could really educate and advocate the same kind of message throughout all the different nations, you know. And I think that suggestion is very important because what your country has and all the good case studies that you have, you could share it openly with all the rest of the members so that they can operate in the same manner, right? Because all these associations right now is like, oh, maybe CZ is coming to Singapore, they come over, shake hand, put a photo, and then bye. You know, that's not what we are trying to do, right? This is not policy making. This is just pure PR, right? So we need people who is really into the policy, and we need people that can actually talk about policy and make some changes, right? So there are a lot of public consultancy paper, you know, from various countries. And if this thing is serious, you know, it should be open to people in the global manner, you know, so that people can contribute the paper, contribute the ideas properly, so that it can be executed in a more standardized manner, you know, throughout the world, right? So I think that part is really missing from this equation.
We have a few minutes left. I want to wrap up here in a moment. Andy, it sounds like you're calling for more international cooperation. You're calling for more serious policy discussions and policy organizations around the world. When we started Bitcoin Policy Institute, we did it because nobody else was doing it. There wasn't another Bitcoin-only policy organization in Washington, D.C. So there is a void, right? And the U.S. is now leading in some of these policy discussions, but it took years to get here. So if you're anywhere in the world, like there's an opportunity for you. If you understand Bitcoin and you believe in it, there's an opportunity to engage with your policymakers. But I'd like to wrap up here and hear from each of you one thing that you'd like to see, policy or otherwise, to kind of take the next step in Bitcoin adoption. Perhaps you've learned it from the United States and their approach to Bitcoin. Perhaps you've learned it from another country and how they're approaching Bitcoin. But we'll go down the line here. Nenter, what are your thoughts?
Sure. And I guess, you know, since we're here in Hong Kong attending Bitcoin Asia, I do believe that Hong Kong's regulatory framework is one that certainly is very proactive and forward-thinking in nature. Maybe not pertaining specifically to Bitcoin, but I think for crypto as a whole. And a good example is this LEAP 2.0 framework, right, which was updated relatively recently. And why I say that is everyone understands, you know, HK dollar stablecoin or any other place in the world, right? But how do you actually, what happens after it's issued? The real world use cases. And in Hong Kong, which largely depends on institutional volume, I think from day one, you're able to trade secondary government bonds, ETFs, commodities, and certain renewable energy assets. And I think that's pretty crucial because, you know, having this framework and allowing it to have that institutional flow on day one really sort of takes it from 0 to 1 and go from there. So to me, I think Hong Kong's framework is actually quite designed quite well.
Andy, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I have just two very short points. So I wrote a report with NM Capital from Hong Kong about stablecoin. I think number one is we should take stablecoin seriously, right? Stablecoin is not just about Tether or Circle. You know, there's a lot of other frameworks that we can put into that. And the second part that I really want to mention is I hope that decentralized policies or decentralized network can be taken more seriously. You know, because if you talk to different government right now, most of them are trying to catch up. And if you talk to them about DeFi or decentralized networks, you know, they have no clue. And they think that we are doing some criminal things behind the scene, right? So I think that policy should be in place as well.
Bilal?
So I think a lot of these governments are working in silos. I think what will be great is like just like we have international aviation rules, banking rules, there should be a body that leads charge on a basic regulatory framework for digital assets, or let's say Bitcoin, which presses that every single country must have a basic regulatory regime, and then which every country can contribute towards for exchanges, for custody, for stable coins. And I think this can be a game changer globally at the adoption of Bitcoin. But there has to be like these bigger organizations of the world that invites, people like you and institutes like you, where we can turn this global confusion, which is there still, into clarity for adoption.
Jeremy, close us out.
Yes, so I think every country in this world needs to have a ministry or an official office for blockchain and Bitcoin, right? Every country wants to collaborate with each other on Bitcoin and blockchain, but each time that conversation gets very difficult because do we speak to regulators? Do we speak to the trade and finance people? Do we speak to the industry people? But I think the best way to synergize the entire world would be to have an official blockchain and Bitcoin ministry. And that way, every country in the world knows how to speak on the same terms, the same terminology, the same technology. And I think that's great for the world.
If you want to lead in Bitcoin, if you want to continue this momentum, talk to anybody on the stage. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been an amazing panel. Thank you all.
Thanks, Grant.